Hey gang, we are at Chapel Lawn Memorial Gardens. We're in Schererville, Indiana, and we are going to be paying respects to a little boy who was killed. He was killed in a plane crash, but he wasn't on the plane. He was in the car with the family. It's quite a story, a very sad story, a pretty horrific story. I want to thank Donald Netzel, one of our viewers, for suggesting this. So let's take a walk and I'll tell you the story of little Joshua Anthony Woods. He was just a kindergartner. It was here in Leroy, Indiana, here being about 15 miles southeast of here, where the family lived. They were a struggling family. They had 4 children. A family that lived payday to payday, just like many other families. And it was on December 8th in 2005. Well, it was Southwest Airlines Flight 1248, a Boeing 737-700. It was coming in on instruments to land in a snowstorm. And where was it coming in? It was coming into an airport called Midway. Now let's talk about Midway Airport. Midway Airport is it's downtown Chicago. And it's called the Black Hole by pilots. Why is it called that, or was? I've landed there. As you know, I'm a pilot. And I've landed there several times, and it is, picture a square. And surrounding it is houses. I mean, right up against it, and some factory. And to use most of the land, it's just minimal amount of land. They have their runways all run diagonally to get the most length, which is 6,000 feet at the longest, nominally, and barely enough room to land a commercial jet. If you consider everything goes right, it's fine. But it's about half the length of the runways, for example, at O'Hare Airport. Big commercial airports, they run 9 to 10, up to 12,000 feet. And then they also have runoff area. At these runways, it just stops at a wall, and the street's right on the other side with traffic. If you've ever landed at Midway in a commercial jet, and they put the thrust reversers on, and the brakes, and you're slowing down, Southwest Airlines mostly, you will note that when you taxi off the runway, it's right at the end, typically, many times. So, no room for big air, no room for screw-ups. Well, they always say that it takes us pilots, it's links in a chain. It's not one mistake, but it's a series of mistakes, and they all add up. And then bad things happen. Leroy Woods, the father, was in the car with his family, wife and the 3 boys. One of the boys was not with them. They were stuck in traffic on Central Avenue, right at 55th Street, right at that intersection, right where one of those corners were I was describing. And of course it's snowing and they're crawling along, basically stopped. They were on their way to their grandmother's house, lived in Chicago there. And the father, Leroy, he had just diverted off the other parallel main road on the other side of the airport. I think it's Pulaski, thinking the traffic might be a little better. And it was a fateful decision. The traffic wasn't better. And as they crawled along, Leroy listened to the jets. And then he thought he heard one that was getting louder and louder. And as he looked out the window, the next thing he knew, he was looking straight into the engine of a 737. It was that Southwest Airlines Flight 1248. and it had skidded through the end of the runway and crashed through a steel wall, and it had crushed their car. Now Leroy jumped out, and he immediately tried to save his family, the boys. He was yelling for Joshua. He was saying, "I can't see him." Well, then he climbed out through the shattered driver's side window, and just imagine above him, the jet engine continued to roar. He was able to grab 4-year-old Jake, pull him free, but Joshua and Matt, who was 1-year-old Matt, they had to be extricated later by lifesavers. And very sadly, Joshua died in the crash. As I had said, he was a kindergartner. He was only 6 years old. And he had attended the Winfield Elementary School. His parents, 2 brothers, were injured. And in the end, there were at least 10 people injured in the crash, and 3 of the 98 passengers were also injured. Now, the pilot, you say, what happened? Well, the pilot's name, Bruce Sutherland. He was 59 years old. He was a U.S. Air Force pilot, 69 to 95, very experienced. First officer was a man named Stephen Oliver. It was 7:15 p.m. and there was 8 inches of snow on the ground. Runways reported clear prior to landing, so no major big deal. You just follow the procedures. But the first link in the chain was that they had an 11-knot tailwind. Now, why would you land with the wind and not into the wind as you typically do, and sometimes crosswind? Well, they do that at the commercial, the big jets sometimes, various reasons, mainly the approach. And it turned out that the longest approach with the best minimums, we call them minimums, like where the ceiling is and when you can execute approach, where you can see the runway when you break out of the clouds, we call that minimums. 500 feet, 300 feet. And that's when you can say clear to land, or the tower says, you had said clear to land, that's when you say, I'm gonna land. If you can't see the runway, you have to do what's called a go round, try it again, or go somewhere else, divert. Didn't seem to be the problem because they met the minimums, but if they used the other runway into the wind, they wouldn't, I don't think they were meeting minimums. So they chose, one link of the chain. That's why they went with the tailwind landing. Now, the other big mistake they made was, probably the biggest mistake, is probably not using checklists. And that's the number one thing we do as pilots. And as you know, to slow an aircraft down, you use thrust reversers. Now, I've never flown, commercial jets. The biggest plane I've flown that I owned was an amphib Cessna Caravan, which is a jet engine, a turbine engine, and we use reverse thrust with the propeller. And in their case, the thrust reversers are in what's called a stowed position. And again, I'm not familiar with the 737 old cockpit, but stowed usually means it's kind of, there's a step you have to go through first to deploy. That would be on the checklist. On my planes, we just, pull it back, go into the reverse mode. Anyway, when the wheels touched the ground, he was fumbling for the thrust reversers. I don't know what, they were panicking. And they were saying in the the cockpit recorder, we're effed, we're this, we're screwed. As they were scrambling, watching the end of the runway. I think it was 18 seconds from touchdown before they finally got the thrust reversers going, too late. So, big screw up. And I might also add, which is really reprehensible, is that before they landed, as they were coming in, they were making jokes about the weather. And I think it was the captain who was singing, "The weather outside is frightful, da-da-da-da," and then somebody said, the weather, I think it was the co-pilot. And then the captain said, "The weather's rosy," and they were joking about the movie, the comedy movie, Airplane. Like, remember that movie? Like, hey, we're in that movie. And they were laughing. They basically said, the quote, "I picked a bad day to stop sniffing glue," from the movie. And they sang on and they joked and they came in and they screwed up. Now, what was unbelievable was that, guys, this is all unbelievable, but imagine this. Imagine this. When the plane came to a stop in the middle of the street, with all the destruction and smoke and screaming, I think it was Oliver, the co-pilot, looks out the window and he looks down. You know, he's like 2 stories, 3 stories up in the cockpit, whatever. You know, not 3 stories, but that's 747. But he looks down, and what does he see? He sees a man with a bloody face holding his child in his arms, and he's looking up at him going, and he's saying, "Get this effing plane off my family or off my car." That was Leroy. That was the father, as little Joshua's in the back dead. Imagine that picture. Imagine that. Well, what happens next? Well, of course, life safety comes. They get them cut out of the car and everything's up for grabs. I can't tell you what happened to the pilots. Did they get prosecuted? Did they get fired? Maybe you viewers can help me, because I looked it up. I couldn't find much on it. I couldn't find anything on that part. We have a World War II vet here. We'll stop and pay respects. Joseph B. Sandoval. He was young. He was born in 23, so you know he was very young when he served. Passed in 2014, just after his wife, Ramona. Of course, you know, when disasters happen, then everybody, oh, we better do something, we better make some changes. So of course at Midway, you can't really make the runways longer. I think Southwest Airlines got blamed partially for lack of training, blah, blah, blah. You know how that goes. But they did include buffers, you know, big giant 16-foot by 16-foot blocks. 200 feet of, like, you know, when you crash your car on the highway, it's like slows you down. I think it's good for 40 miles per hour, 45 miles per hour or so. Anything faster, today it's gonna go through the wall. So I'm not saying to not fly in the Midway, it's very safe, but I still don't like it. and I'm a pilot. So that's the story, guys. And just ahead here is Joshua's grave. It is a granite monument in the shape of an armchair. Right here. So let's take a look. All the graves here are facing east. I noticed that is east. And these are almost all newer, very, very recent graves. And I'm purposely kind of walking to the backs of the graves, guys, because I mean, some of these people were buried in the last few months, so that's just my own prerogative. All right, here it is. Well, this is the monument, and then we have his grave monument, so we'll take a look at this first. Joshua, it says, if we could have a lifetime with the dream that would come true, we'd pray to God with all our hearts for yesterday and you. Love, Joey, Jake, and Matt, Cindy, and Jessica. And then as we walk over here, you can see it's a lovely stone here with a picture of Joshua. In loving memory, Joshua Anthony Woods, November 16, 1999, December 8, 2005. We see the horses. He loved horses. His little scooter. Loving son, brother, grandson, nephew, you are always in our hearts. There's some nice things left here. Some nice things left here. I see here, I just noticed this. I guess Leroy may have passed, or this might be, no, I think this is, oh yeah. This is all he has, guys. 2017. September 22nd, his dad passed away. He was born in 65, 6 years younger than me. Wow. I'm sorry to hear that. I did not know that Leroy had passed. But I'll tell you this, he's reunited with his son, Joshua and Leroy together. Oh, it breaks my heart, guys. Breaks my heart. Well, I'll just close it out by telling you that some kind words from the principal at his school back then, Patricia Carnahan. She remembered the last time that she saw Joshua. She said, he was sitting by the office with his mom on Friday waiting to be dismissed. He was a handsome young man, a little blonde boy. Very tall with that push-up hair that the boys like to do. He just was a sweetheart. Joshua kind of stood out. He was taller than most of the other kindergarten students. He had a real friendly look upon him. He wasn't rambunctious. He was just a kind and gentle type of soul. It's a very sad story. A life taken way too young. But he's in heaven now with his dad, and I'm hoping the rest of the family is doing okay. And Joshua and Leroy, rest in peace.